the award is funded. So first up today, we have our special guest speaker, Debbie Campbell, who is our resident pre-award wizard, and she's going to talk to us about this section on proposal initiation. So I'm actually going to stop my share and let Debbie share and talk to us about that part of the pre-award process.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone. I do have a lot of experience with pre-award. I manage post-award and compliance and other aspects of the research process, but I have probably submitted hundreds of proposals over the years. And part of the reason I worked in RMG, I was an RPM for several years. And, RMG, I just want to say a word about that. On their website, they do indicate what their role is and what the role of the department is. And it's good to reference that occasionally. They process thousands of proposals every year. And so I think of them as like when I worked there, I was like an air traffic controller. So I had planes at a very busy airport. So I'm landing planes. I have many coming in and I'm juggling a ton of information from that desk. So the more that you partner with them, the happier they're going to be and the smoother the whole process is going to go. So this is sort of the beginning of that. What I do when I hear about a faculty member who wants to submit a proposal, I try really hard to get them to meet with me. And of course, this is all Zoom these days, but even before I worked remotely, I like to do this meeting via Zoom because it's really helpful to share the screen with some of the information we talk about during that meeting. So I know the faculty are really busy and it may be hard to get this meeting set up, but I really try to make it happen because there's so much downstream benefit to it. In the initial Zoom meeting with a PI, it's like an opportunity to communicate one-on-one with them, and I get more familiar with their project, which is really important. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's also a time, it's like I'm communicating to them that we'll talk about the technicalities of the timeline, because there'll be internal deadlines and external deadlines. And I'm also helping them from the very beginning because they sometimes don't know if it's an NIH proposal that there is an actual written definition for senior key personnel. And I'm helping them think through, because remember, they're thinking about the science. They're not really thinking about logistics, about how this proposal is going to all come together. So that's good. I want them to focus on the science, but I want them to share the science with me so I can help facilitate. And so I break it down into sort of three categories. The role of the research administrator, I believe that we manage relationships, and the relationship management piece is helpful, of course, in all the work we do, but especially important during a pre-award process because it's so deadline driven and it can be so intense and there's so many moving pieces. The next one is process management. So we are managing a process. And I think that the more we can take ownership of the process, the smoother it's going to go. And then we, of course, manage a ton of information. So the first piece in that first meeting with the PI, I'm like setting the tone for our partnership because I'm going to be partnering with them. So I'm interested in their research and their role, and I can find that out by asking just a couple simple questions. I like to know if they have clinic responsibilities. Maybe they're covering for someone and they're in the clinic 4 days a week. It's helpful to know what their time constraints are. And I also want to learn more about the particular project because this will help me plan how we're going to tackle some of the compliance items that might be coming up in advance. And I'm also taking the responsibility for the process, and I'm letting the PI know this. I tell them things like, I'll help you meet the deadlines, and I'm going to provide a checklist to you. They love checklists. So I will send them a checklist as soon as we get off the call. So that's the first tool I'm going to provide to them that they're going to appreciate. I also let them know my background and experience, my past experience and their past experience submitting grants, and this really pays off. The thing you don't really think about is when you're having these conversations with the PIs, they'll often mention other proposals and collaborations they're planning as well, which is super helpful. So I'm talking to a PI about an R01 and they just happen to mention, I'm also planning to submit a U01 in September, and there'll be 8 collaborators and 6 sub-awards or something, and it's like, I'd like to know that as soon as possible because there's going to be a lot of moving parts for me to coordinate. And so this is something that comes out of that early meeting. And one mechanism you can use is the PIF. So the proposal initiation form, just to give you a little tiny history on that. In the old days, when a PI had a proposal that they were planning to submit, they or their RA would send an email very informally to the RPM, and the RPM would then develop a template budget and the ball would get rolling. Then RMG said, oh, we're getting way too random emails with information flying around. This isn't working. So they developed that worksheet template that you see. Well, then what happened is the information that they want to gather at the pre-award stage kept growing as things got more complicated. And so then it was developed as a module in SARA, the proposal initiation form. So now it's all electronic, and they can capture a lot more information a lot more easily. The PIF is the only way that RMG gets this on their radar. It's the only way they're going to start working on the proposal. For the most part, they will not take any action until that PIF routes to them. And we want to get that to their dashboard as early as possible. So another part of managing the process is there's many different central offices that might be involved in a given proposal. And sometimes it's hard to sort out which office. I have had proposals where I have worked literally with 4 different internal offices trying to figure out, now I'm not talking about NIH, that's kind of easy, but we have other funders. So whether it goes to the fellowship office, is it going to be a clinical trial? What role of the CTRPM is the CTRPM going to play? Or does it go over to OSR? Some of that, or even involve the institutional contract office, ICO, who deals with industry. And sometimes these things aren't super clear, and the PIs just love to have someone like us figure all that out for them. And so we're going to establish the workflow, and early on in the process, I will try to learn who is going to manage the biosketches, for example, and the publication library of the PI. And if it's an admin, so the PI says, oh, yeah, I have an admin, Amy's going to do that. I will reach out to Amy after I get off of the call, and I'll make sure she's aware of the current formatting requirements for the biosketches. And I've been on projects where there's been 30-something biosketches to collect. So, they'll come in all different varying degrees of correctness. And so the earlier I can sort of head that off and say, make sure they use this template and make sure you're paying attention to the publications that they're in compliance, the better it's going to go. So we're also information managers, and this is where, like I was saying, the PIP is the perfect framework for collecting information about the project. So I have the Zoom meeting, I do shared screen, I initiate the PIP, and we walk through it together. And I have a few things on hand too, because they get asked of me frequently or enough that it's good to have them around. And that's like, I'll say, well, who else will be senior key personnel in the project? And they might say, well, I don't know. I'm working with Dr. So-and-so and so-and-so, and they're not sure whether they're going to be considered senior key personnel. And so NIH actually has a definition. So I will make sure they see that definition to see if these people fit into that category or not. That's super important because that's going to drive what biosketches you need to collect. And also a time to establish if there's outside collaborators, what type of work they're going to do. So they might say, yeah, I'm going to be working with the University of Pennsylvania, but it's not a subcontract. And so, well, what is it going to be? What is the mechanism that we're going to pay University of Pennsylvania? If they're consultants, that's good to know. I'm going to need a letter of support. And so, I also really try to persuade the PI to draft budget line items at this time. You can attach a very simple draft budget template or a budget justification. Sometimes they're hesitant at this point because they haven't nailed down the science yet, but I just stress, it's just a draft. It can be changed 1,000 times between now and when the final budget's developed, but we have to send some budget information to RMG to get the ball rolling. So even if they name 2 collaborators, a postdoc, and lab supplies, I mean, something to get the ball rolling. Briefly review compliance questions. So this is a good time to ask if there will be a foreign component or any international collaborations, whether paid or unpaid. And I talk about whether there'll be human subjects. And there's multiple reasons for this. One, we want to make sure that the RFA they're responding to allows clinical trials. And there is additional information we have to collect if it is truly meets the NIH definition of a clinical trial. And I will show them this because it's new enough that all the PIs don't realize that they are going to need to provide pretty deep level of information about human subjects if it's going to be a clinical, if it's defined as a clinical trial, which would be answering yes to these 4 questions here. And so I will go over this with them because in addition, they're used to doing inclusion of women and minorities. They may not be in the habit of developing recruitment and retention plans during this stage. They may not even have a study timeline. And so they really appreciate getting the heads up that all this information NIH collects now early in the process. And so it's not a surprise to them when they only have a few days to the deadline and suddenly you're helping them with the assist application and there's all these questions to information about the protocol they don't know. There's also, I also usually bring up to them which institute, if it's NIH, are they applying, or do they want this directed to if they've got a certain institute in mind? And then are there any study sections that they would like to recommend or scientific area? They often, in the old days, that used to be a, the PHS assignment form used to be communicated via a cover letter, and NIH replaced the cover letter with this form. So I like to point that out to the PI too, because they appreciate knowing that that's an option. So some key takeaways is, initiating the PIP is an opportunity to connect with the PI and better understand the project and learn about other proposals that they have coming down the line. We can clarify human subjects because remember, some some RFAs do not allow clinical trials, and it would be close to a disaster if we uploaded the wrong RFA to Assist and it was submitted and then not read for this kind of basic piece of non-compliance. And yes, the RMG, RPM would hopefully catch this, but it's really our responsibility to watch for this. And we have informal discussions that reveal their thinking about co-investigators and collaborators at Stanford and outside Stanford, which informs me what are the supporting documents that will be needed, like the letters of support. Am I collecting those? Is the PI going to go out to their colleagues and collect them? And sometimes they haven't thought through how they're going to pay them. Are they paying them as a consultant, a professional service agreement, or a subcontract? So if we're going to be subbing to outside entities, we really need to know that at the starting gate. And then it ultimately streamlines the process and puts less burden on the PI, which they really appreciate. And especially during, I'll just close with this, the COVID year that we've had, I had PIs that were covering hospital, responsibilities much more intensely than they normally would. And they would be working with me on something, and then they'd say, I got to run to intubate a patient in the ICU, and then they're running back, and then they're running off, and I have people in surgery and all over in the hospital, really under a lot of extra stress at the clinic and in the hospital. And so I am just so mindful of that. And I think one of the really rewarding parts about the work we do is the more we help the PIs with these administrative asks and responsibilities, the more they can truly focus on the science and on taking care of the patients and teaching the scientists that are coming up behind them. And that's really why we're there. So this is one way that I try to just do my part in the whole research sort of infrastructure that we make up. So that's all I have. I know Emily has a lot more, so I will stop share, and feel free to send questions through chat or to me by email after the session. I'd be happy to talk to you more one-on-one.